Good afternoon, members. We have formed a quorum. It is also time to start, so I call the meeting to order. Item 1 on the agenda, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. The draft minutes have already been sent out to members, so can I check with you? We haven't received any proposed amendments. Do you propose any amendments on the spot? No? Then minutes confirmed. Item 2. Information paper issued. Since the last meeting, we haven't issued any information paper. And then at our last meeting, we endorsed the setting up of a joint subcommittee to study the offsetting arrangements of MPF. And in fact, the Financial Affairs Panel has also supported the idea after discussion on the 2nd of March. The Joint Subcommittee is now on the 3rd place of the queue. We have got many subcommittees in the waiting queue, and according to the Secretariat, in relation to the subcommittees studying policy issues on the waiting list, and depending on their need to extend their work or not, it would only be in the middle of 2015 that there will be a vacancy for us to take up the quota. So we're in the process of waiting for our turn to be convened. Mr. Tang Ka-piu. Does it mean that the subcommittee on standard working hours is at the 2nd place? Yes, this is the 3rd. Item 3 on the agenda, date of next meeting and items for discussion. We propose to have our next regular meeting on the 21st of April at 4:30 p.m., which is a Tuesday. According to the Bureau's suggestions, we should be having 2 items on the agenda, which is the major findings of the 2014 Annual Earnings and Hours Survey. In fact, we have it every year, and it is also on the list of outstanding items for discussion. The second proposal is about the latest developments in the employment services of the Labour Department. Mr. Kwok. Well, as you know, that recently there was a labor dispute concerning the library assistants at the public libraries. It shows that there are inadequacies in the contracting out of our library services. So I just wonder if we can advance item 9 in the list. Yes, we can reflect your concern to the Bureau. That is the Labour and Welfare Bureau. We have to check whether they are ready to talk about this. Mr. Tang. Thank you. And then item 15, the reinstatement order. We have been waiting for 3 years in a row already. So are they coming back or not? Yes, we have to go after them for this matter. Next, we come to the discussion section of our meeting. First of all, work safety of repair, maintenance, alteration and addition works. So please refer to paper CB bracket 2 1044/14 to 15 bracket 03. Our Secretariat has also prepared a background brief. Paper CB bracket 2 1044/14 to 15 bracket 04. So please refer to both papers, and we will get a briefing from the Labour Department. I would like to welcome Mr. Leung Zhan-Wing, the Deputy Commissioner, and Mr. Lee, Assistant Commissioner, as well as Mr. Leung Yuk-keung, who is the Chief Labor Officer. Maybe we can get a briefing from the administration. Please give us a briefing, and then I'll open the floor to members for questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I want to walk you through the paper briefly. I've also got some supplementary information with me that I would like to share with you. Yes, please speak into the microphone. Deputy Commissioner. Yes, I come here to explain to members the content of our paper, which is on the work safety performance of repair, maintenance, alteration, and addition works. I would also like to share with you what the LD has been doing in response, and I look forward to your advice. For fatal cases, between the years 2011 and 2014, we have seen an increase. It in 2011 increased to 11 in the year 2013, so an increase of almost 40%. Regarding such a trend, we were very concerned, and we have responded with a number of initiatives. And then in the year 2014, it appeared that there has been a coming down. There were 8 cases, so a decrease of about 30% when compared with the previous year. But then for RMAA, regarding the safety performance, the Labor Department is still very concerned about the case for 2 reasons. First of all, for the year 2014, the number of fatal cases has recorded a significant decrease. But then for the first 3 quarters of 2014, for non-fatal cases, there were 796 cases. Compared with 2013, there was only a slight decrease of 1.8%. For the second reason, we are still highly concerned about it. This is because we anticipate that for the next few years, the number of RMAA projects will still be at a high level. This is because of the aging of the buildings in Hong Kong, and this is also because of the mandatory building inspection scheme, which has been launched a few years ago, and so there has been a lot of repair work done to the external walls. Mr. Chairman, we have studied the fatal cases recorded in the past few years, and in fact the major group is 4 of person from height, accounting for almost 70% of the total number of fatal cases. For 4 of person from height cases, 3 types of workplaces are involved: bamboo scaffolds 40%, false works 20%, and then falling from ladders accounting for 12%. Usually this source has been neglected by many workers. The 3 types account for over 70% of the fatal cases in the RMAA sector. If we go beyond the fatal cases, we can also look at the other cases as well. And for the cases that we have carried out an investigation, it means that they are relatively more serious. So other than the fatal cases, we have also observed serious injuries. We have noted that falling from 3 meters or less above ground have accounted for 70%, for 3 meters or above 25%. In addition, among the cases that we have studied, for falling from ladders, they account for half of the cases. From this analysis, we can see that improper use of bamboo scaffolds and improper use of ladders account for the majority of the serious injuries, we have to take measures to enhance work at height safety. We also believe that we mustn't overlook the risk involved in working at a height which is 3 meters or less above ground. We have stepped up our inspection and enforcement. When compared with the year 2011, we have increased the number of suspension notices. The number has been doubled, and in fact, the enforcement action has been increased by 50%. And in recent years, we have also fine-tuned our enforcement approach. We have gathered more information, and we have also got a district-based inspection approach so as to make it more tactical and more efficient. If members are interested, I think we can ask our Assistant Commissioner to elaborate. In addition, in the recent years, we try to work at source so as to promote various measures. Say, for example, we have safety training, safety guidelines. We have also got sponsorship schemes so as to reduce the systemic risks. And I will try to highlight a few examples. The details are found in the paper. In June 2012, there was the introduction of the OSH Star Enterprise Safety Accreditation Scheme. This is targeted at the contractors of bamboo scaffolds. If they can get the accreditation, they can save up to 50% of their premium. So we're talking about savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars in insurance premium per year. And then in April 2013, we started the mobile platform sponsorship scheme. And then we have also introduced the certificate course for the safety anchors. And we have also got the guidelines for bamboo scaffolds so as to delineate clearly the division of responsibilities between the principal contractor and the subcontractors. So if members are interested in the various schemes, I'm sure our Chief Occupational Safety Officer can elaborate on the details. I would like to pause here, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to take questions from you.
Assistant Commissioner, are you going to give us some examples? Do you want to do it now or later? Well, I can do it now or after members have asked questions. All right, then I think we give the floor to members first. There are 4 members. Any more members who would like to ask questions? So each member will have up to 5 minutes for questions and answers. First, Mr. Pan Xiaoping. Right, you didn't raise your hand when I asked. The Deputy Commissioner just gave us a briefing on safety measures for RMAA. So there was a reduction to 8 cases from 11 in 2013 or 2014. I'm always worried that when workload is heavy, there will be higher accident rates. Recently, people say that it's difficult to employ a safety officer. Of course, such officers are employed by the employer, and we've always questioned their role. So will the Labour Department review the roles and duties of safety officers and safety auditors? know it's always difficult to carry out inspections of RMAA works. According to your footnote, you have prosecuted over 400 cases. Can we be given some statistics covering 2011 to 2015, the number of prosecutions and the number of suspension notices SNs issued? And the paper also mentioned under para 12, the OSH committee under the Labour Advisory Committee, and also the construction industry stakeholders, professional bodies and relevant government departments. And after consulting them, the government decided to allow competent persons who had received specific training to conduct the relevant inspection and testing work. Will it mainly target at high risk bamboo scaffolds? Now, according to your paper, 89 persons have been given certificates. So I'd like to know whether it is indeed helpful to promote safety. Thank you. First, on statistics of prosecutions. I'll cover 2012 to 2015 because I don't have any statistics on 2011. So starting from 2012, the number of prosecutions, there were 907 in 2012, 918 in 2013, 1037 in 2014, so a steady increase over the years. And SNs in 2012, 461 notices were issued. 2013, the figure rose to 499, and then 594 in 2014. Again, a steadily increasing trend. Regarding para 12, on competent persons. Now, if external works have to be done at the external wall, then an anchor device has to be done for attaching the safety belt for the workers. In the past, we required structural engineers to test the anchor devices before works could commence. We're told by the industry that for minor works conducted in rather remote areas, for instance, a unit in Tuen Mun, if a truss-out scaffold has to be erected, even though the contractor was willing to pay, no structural engineer would be willing to travel that far to carry out that test. So, taking on board the views of the industry, we agreed that an experienced worker could take on this work after attending specific training to become a competent person. And we've also prepared very detailed guidelines. And there's also a teaching kit made by the OSHC and the relevant university. Also, the safety guidebook has been circulated to all professional organizations, including the Institute of Engineers. They agree that an experienced worker that has passed a test after a safety program should be competent to test anchor devices. So over 80 workers have have taken the course and issued with certificates. I think we have to observe a little bit longer before we can be certain of the effectiveness. I'm afraid you have overrun a lot. Can your answers be more succinct? And I hope members will not ask too many questions in one go, because if you spend more than 3 minutes on questions, you can't expect the official to answer your questions in details. So I'm afraid we have to move on. Dr. N. Zhang, and to be followed by Mr. Kwok Wai Keung next. Thank you, Chairman. Well, the figures are rather shocking. Within 4 years, we've got 36 industrial accidents fatal, and 25 of them involved falling from height. I'd like to know whether there's a further breakdown. For cases where the workers did not wear a safety belt, and also the number of cases when where the employer was to be held responsible. So I like to understand this. And secondly, you have this safety accreditation scheme and sponsorship scheme. In June 2012, together with the OSHC, the RMAA Safety or OSH Star Enterprise Safety Accreditation Scheme was launched. All right, we're told that 26 SMEs have been accredited. I'd like to know the percentage they account for. Well, we are not too sure about the actual number of RMAA contractors because we don't have a registration system. But according to the industry, there are a few hundreds contractors in erecting such scaffolds. 26 have been accredited, and 40-something are still waiting to be accredited. So in total, there are 60-odd. They don't account for a large proportion of all the contractors in the market. However, the scheme is still young, and we hope to promote it further to employers in particular. In assessing bids, can they give more consideration to accredited contractors so that this can be an incentive for them to take the accreditation? So we really have to work harder on this front. Dr. Zhang asked about the respective account responsibility of workers and employers. Dr. Zhang talked about employers' failure to provide safety devices. Yes, we do have such cases, and there are also cases where workers fail to use these safety devices. However, we've always stressed to employers that employers cannot be entirely responsibility-free if workers refuse to use such safety devices, because employers do have a supervisory role, because it takes a few hours for a bamboo scaffolding to be erected, and if workers have consistently ignored to use such safety device, then I think the employer has a role too, so they should supervise properly. What about the relative or proportion of such cases? Well, I don't have such information with me. Can you give us supplementary information afterwards? Well, for each case, there is bound to be special circumstances. It may be hard to classify. Well, if you have such information, please let Dr. N. Zhang have it. Yes, I want some such information. Because some workers may be new to the industry and they may be too exhausted after OT work. And a slight oversight can lead to a tragedy. But if it is employers' failure to provide the safety devices, that cannot be forgiven. So I think it is important that we know the causes of these cases to facilitate publicity and promotion. All right, Mr. Godwicker is not here for the time being, so Mr. Tankabio to be followed by Dr. Kwakaki. Thank you. I think RMAA works a bit different from the construction industry. Large developers do want to ensure that subcontracting is not too much, and there is very clear differentiation of who are contractors or subcontractors and workers after so many years. But for RMAA works, things are not so clear-cut. So according to Mr. Leung, it might be difficult to tell whose responsibility it was. But talk about these 36 fatal accidents. I'd like to know whether in these cases there were disputes over whether the victims were the employer or the worker. So, were there ever any dispute? And secondly, were there cases where no labor insurance coverage was provided? In some cases, there was only accident insurance coverage, and if the insurer questions whether there was sufficient safety precautions taken, perhaps claims could not be processed. So I'd like to know the situation of these cases. And in the news, we frequently hear about employers' failure to provide safety devices or a safe working environment for employers. And even upon conviction, the fine is only a few tens of thousands dollars, although it was a fatal accident. So I'd like to know the number of cases where employers were prosecuted, and also the level of fines upon conviction, and also the length of imprisonment in some cases.
Commissioner, yes, I do have some information. Mr. Tang talked about the dispute over the status of the employees. For all the fatal cases, we were able to establish the employer-employee relationship. In individual cases, in the initial stage, there was denial. On the part of employer about the status of the employee, as Mr. Tang has referred to. According to the laws of Hong Kong, it isn't just a matter of whether there is an employment contract. The circumstantial evidence will be important as well. When Labour Department staff receive news of fatal cases, we will carry out investigation immediately. So the questions asked right on the spot will become part of the evidence, and we will have statements. And then when the DOJ considers prosecution, then we can sort of deduce that there is an employer-employee relationship. So my understanding is that at the end of the day, the employer didn't contest the relationship. So it's a matter of the experience of our law enforcement colleagues and arrival at the scene speedily, so as to gather evidence. For the details, I don't think it's right for me to divulge. For the fatal cases, in most cases, we were able to prosecute the employers successfully. For the penalties, it all depends on the court's decision. having heard the evidence from all parties, and whether the employer has already carry out his duties properly, whether there has been a previous record, and whether there are mitigating circumstances. But then that goes beyond our job. For us, we talk about the seriousness of the case, and we'll try to tell the court whether there is a worsening trend. Ultimately, it's up to the court to hand down the sentence. Among the 36 cases, how many resulted in prosecution? How many cases were convicted? We can provide information after the meeting. Next, Dr. K.K. Kwok, to be followed by Leung Kwok Hong. Mr. Chairman, on the face of it, the number of cases is not on the high side. Just 8 died. But then from the year 2010 onwards, the number of fatal cases has remained more or less the same. RMAA works should be less risky than other construction projects, but still the number of fatal cases remains more or less the same throughout the years. To me, one life loss is one loss too much. So since 2011, we have been getting 8 or more fatal cases per year. Now, you have been telling us all the time that you have done a lot, say, for example, the accreditation scheme, as well as the mobile platform sponsorship scheme. But the figures are more telltale. Now, for the RMAA works, they might not have an employer or their SMEs. I want to know to what extent can you cover the site inspections? Say, for example, there might very well be 30,000 such workers, but then how many can you reach out to them? And are you able to give them the relevant information? You have 1,037 cases of prosecution. I think it must be on the low side vis-a-vis the total work volume of RMAA. We have got 800 cases in the first 3 quarters of 2014, and in fact among the entire industry there must be 3,000 cases. In other words, you are not able to cover all the cases. So can you not tell us whether you can enhance your inspection for micro enterprises, SMEs, or small partnerships with 2 or 3 doing the work? Well, usually we have got fatalities in such a setup. And then according to your analysis, and we can also get it from the papers, many fatal cases involved falling from height. Just last week, there was one such case. This has been so for many years. What have you done to make sure that the workers know that they have to protect themselves? Mr. Leung, Dr. K.K. Kwok has already pointed out the crux of the matter. That is the enforcement difficulties that we are faced with. For new construction sites, as Mr. Tang has said, we can work through different channels to influence the contractors to enhance safety. We can hold meetings with major contractors, and we can talk to their trade associations. We can agree on safety rules. In the case of public works projects, we can work through the Development Bureau and other relevant works departments so as to exert pressure on them. We can have more ways to influence them. For RMAA works, as Mr. Kwok or Dr. Kwok has said, it is more difficult for us to exert our influence. For the number of inspections that we have carried out, I'm sorry that we haven't actually given an account. For the figures that we've given in the paper, that's about the statutory notices. we carried out 37,000 plus inspections during the past year. However, for RMAA works, the work sites are very much scattered. Currently, for renovation of your home, sometimes you only set up a platform for 1 hour or at most 3 hours, so the risk would only last for an hour or so. Maybe Mr. Lee, the Assistant Commissioner, can tell you about our district-based inspection work. Yes, please keep it succinct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Leung, the Deputy Commissioner, has said, it is very mobile, and the work site is quite hidden from the public, and then it may just be a platform for a unit. It is difficult for us to find this out. So you may think that the enforcement action is not that adequate. This is because sometimes not easy to spot work in progress. Say, for example, when we have housing estates or government buildings undergoing renovation, then we can be sure about the timing, and then we can carry out the inspection. Well, in fact, during the public holiday periods and after office hours, we have also sent out our inspectors to carry out the inspection. We're interested to find out whether the contractor has failed to provide adequate guidance and guidelines and supervision, or whether the workers have failed in their own duties. And when we want to take out prosecution, we must have adequate evidence. So it is important to sort of make the observation while the work is in progress. And that would make our work more effective. Well, for work at height, whether it is renovation or scaffolding, I think we must have a licensing regime. By having a licensing regime, you can be sure about the safety requirements. Otherwise, it is always a cat and mouse game. I think he hasn't answered my question, Mr. Chairman, because I'm interested in the case of micro-enterprises. It's very difficult to answer this question, we all understand. Next, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Mr. Chairman, it's even more difficult to expose the drug cases. Now, for DD cases, either you don't get caught. Once you get caught, then you'll be in big trouble. And you'll be dealt with very seriously. In the past, no one would pay attention to the requirement to wear a safety helmet or to wear a safety harness. I once worked on a construction site. I didn't. Say, for example, once I was scolded for putting on the safety harness when I was working in Kwun Tong at a construction site. Others found that it was most inconvenient, it was clumsy to do so. Now, for irregularities that are difficult to detect, once it is detected, the penalty should be severe. And then you will send out the right message. Well, the contractors won't want to risk their lives, they don't want to risk their freedom, because if you send them to jail, then they would be worried. Now, if they have got employee compensation insurance, then they are not worried. So you must impose heavy fines on them. I think the logic is simple. Secondly, you have said that you have tried to negotiate with them, but then the scaffoldings may only, or the work platform may only be set up for a short period of time, and then you need a structural engineer to confirm that the anchoring is correct, and it makes life difficult. Yes, this is going to be costly, but then human lives are more variable. Now you have got two schemes. There is the mandatory inspection schemes, one for buildings, one for windows, and you have started the floodgate. Therefore, on the one hand, you need to find a way to regulate the activities. Licensing regime or reporting the matter for record. I don't think it is that difficult. If they can hide away from your attention, then of course there's nothing to fear. One day, I walked past. I saw a scaffold being put up while I was traveling on bus. And then I think you recall the API featuring Andy Lau saying that you must have 3 anchoring points, otherwise the web platform won't be secure. So I think we have to send out the message that whenever the irregularity is identified, then it will be subject to heavy penalties. Now I think even though you have only got a few workers carrying out a particular procedure, then the contractor should be held responsible. Once I was criticized for working too slowly, and I told them that we should protect ourselves. Now, sometimes if you work at such a great height, when the spanner falls to the ground, it takes 10 seconds before you reach the ground and you hear the sound of landing. So at the end of the day, many of my colleagues were convinced by me, and they also put on their safety harness. We have to understand that human lives are precious. The lives of workers are precious. Sometimes I'm really getting angry when there is a tragedy. The family will be plunged into sadness. So you have to set the priorities right. You have to be able to impose severe penalties, and you need to know whether and where they are carrying out the work.
You may say that it's hard to know where they are, so you must require them to report to you. There must be someone in charge. Now, if the contractor is not there, and if all the workers are just equal in rank, no one no one has any say. Okay, Mr. Pan, the respective roles of safety officers and safety auditors, will you review their roles? Will you consider how their roles can be enhanced? Yes, we have heard similar views in the past. We are, in fact, thinking along this line, and the specific measures are not yet confirmed, but we do note the problem. What we're doing is, starting from last year, the Labour Department has been issuing warnings involving systemic risks, and these safety officers must come to attend these seminars to receive such information. Such seminars have been made part of the continuous professional development. We've already organized a number of such seminars. With your permission, I'll ask Mr. Leung to supplement. Thank you, Chairman. Will there be a major infrastructure projects or our MAAs risks are particularly high, involving tunneling works, working at height, electrical works, and also the use of lifts and forks. So we believe that some precautionary measures should be taken to tackle such systemic risks. So we have worked out some safety measures, and they've been translated into guidelines. So through our e-platform and other channels, we have been disseminating such information to registered safety officers. We've also organized 5 thematic systemic risks talks for practicing safety officers or practitioners. The seminars were welcome, so we will make them regular events so as to equip safety practitioners so that they are made more aware of the systemic risks, and so to help or advise their employers on what safety precautions to take. Thank you. But there is a contradiction here. These safety officers are employed by the employers. What if their recommendations are not taken up by their employers? I think the administration should reconsider their duties and responsibilities. Yes, this is what we are reviewing. There is a professional association for safety officers. Last year, they launched a professional code of practice, one of which is for a safety officer to notify in writing their recommendations to employers, and if the employers have chosen not to heed their recommendations, safety officers are duty-bound to inform their employers the hazards involved. Last year, the Labour Department wrote to all registered safety officers. We provide a hotline for them to report to the Labour Department if their advice has not been heeded by their employers. And we've also undertaken to keep all such reports confidential. Both Mr. Leung and Mr. Pan have talked about the roles of safety officers, and we are gradually trying to do something about this. All right. You refer to major works. In fact, major works are easier to handle. What is most hazardous is RMAA works at home, maybe a replacement of window frames, and then a master may erect truss-out bamboo scaffolding with his apprentice. I can tell you my personal experience. I once had to change the window frames of my flat. I employ a master, and he went to order the window frames and then called a scaffolding master who was not related to him in any way. So, because it was a truss-out scaffolding, I saw that there was only one anchor device for the whole platform. Now, I nearly quarreled with the master. He said that he had been doing this for so many years, and that was his usual practice. So I had no choice but to call the contractor back to negotiate with him. So these are the most difficult situations. How can you inspect? My flat is on the 10th floor, and you won't know that I have works at home. So I think this was also pointed out by Mr. Lang Ko-hong and Mr. Kwokaki. I think these are situations that you should really think hard how to tackle, because you really cannot tackle the offenders. Well, you handled it very well, because I was the General Secretary of the FTU. If someone fell from height from my flat, I would be in big trouble. Of course, I had to handle it properly. Yes, Chairman, as you said, when there's an accident, of course, lives lost could never be compensated. But in case there is an accident, the contractor responsible for the minor works cannot shirk his responsibility. He cannot tell the judge that he has found a master to erect the scaffolding and he has no responsibility. We've seen many cases where both the minor works contractor and the scaffolding master was held liable. Perhaps the offenders would only be made aware of their responsibility after they have been fined. Perhaps we should step up publicity in this regard. Okay, thank you very much. I think we will end the discussion of this item here. Can we invite the next batch of labor officials in? So the next is progress of work of the Standard Working Hours Committee. We've got a paper from the administration. Paper CB 21044/1415-05. The Secretariat has also prepared a background brief for us. Paper CB 21044/1415-06. Let us welcome Mr. Matthew Cheung, Ms. Annie Tam, PS, and also Mr. Donald Tong. 3 more. Mr. Raymond Ho, Chief Labor Officer. And the principal economist from the FS office is yet to arrive, but we will start our discussion first. Can the administration introduce the paper to us, please? Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the panel. This information paper contains a lot, because at the last meeting, members expressed concern over the progress of the work of the Standard Working Hours Committee, and we promised to come back in due course. So this is a very meaty paper with a lot of useful information. Now, the committee has been established for almost 2 years. It started work in April 2013. The committee has taken its work very seriously. I have to thank Dr. Si Leung for leading and 23 members. They have spent a lot of time and energy to this task. I must take this opportunity to thank them. The terms of reference of the committee is to enhance understanding and of this matter, so as to allow an informed discussion of the matter. And they've adopted an evidence-based approach. They have gathered a lot of information in 2 ways. As I said, it has got 2 working groups. One is responsible for consultation and the other for information collection, and is responsible for a comprehensive working hours survey, the first ever in Hong Kong to survey the working hours of households in Hong Kong. When the CNSD did it, it collected information from employers, but this time information was directly asked of employees or households. So the paper talks about publicity, promotion, public hearings were held. There were 40 of them, and people from different walks of life came to express their views. There was also a website, and we've also made use of CDs and the mass media, and even comics were produced so as to bring out this message. And as I said, a major survey was done because over 10,000 employed persons were sampled in a scientific manner, and there was also a self-administered questionnaire survey. We had surveyed over 2,000 odd sampled members of organizations, of professions and occupations. So it was a multifaceted and comprehensive survey. So from A to 10, you can look at the information collected. Very useful one. According to the survey, on average, people worked 43.5 hours per week, and the median working hours were 44,000. But of course, the range was great. It ranged from 40 to 54 hours per week. For those of lower education, they worked 48 hours, the median working hours, and some 45 hours. Now, because these employees had lower educational attainment and lower skills, their median working hours were longer. About 1/3 of the employees indicated they had worked overtime during the survey period. For compensated overtime, there was about 5 hours per week. For uncompensated overtime work, the median number of hours was 5. And almost 90% of the employees had specified the weekly working hours in their employment contract, but there was no mention of the way of compensation for overtime work in the employment contracts. As for the objective of working hours policy, please refer to paragraph 12. Employers and employees think that the two most important objectives are to ensure a better work-life balance for employees and to maintain a favorable business, or to protect occupational safety and health. And employees attach more significance to compensation for OT work, and for employers, their concern is to maintain a favorable business environment. So I talked about the objectives. And what about the way forward? About 94% of the employees agreed that employment contracts should stipulate clearly the hours of work, overtime arrangements, and overtime compensation.
And then 93% of them would like to have it fixed by mutual agreements between employers and employees. And then 90% would like to set voluntary guidelines. Fewer employees and employers would like to have standard working hours. There's about 67%, ranking last in the league. And then maximum working hours, again, it ranked second but last. For the self-administered questionnaire, the findings from that survey are more or less the same as that found in the survey covering the households. There were lots of consultation sessions, like 40 sessions, and we have also covered trade unions, etc., in relation to their views. We have received almost 5,000 written submissions. So for employees, generally speaking, there is the request to legislate for standard working hours. They also think that it should be 44 hours a week, and then for the compensation, it should be 1.5 times the normal wage rate, and employees should be allowed the right to choose whether to have overtime work or not. And then there are also others who say that it should be 50 all the way up to 70 hours a week. Employers generally strongly object to a standardized set of working hours across the board. They think that we can work through clear contractual arrangements so that there can be an agreement on the working hours, and also there can be voluntary guidelines for working hours for individual sectors. And again, this tally with the consultation findings. For our consultant, the consultant has also sounded out the views of the trade associations as well as the labor unions. For the working hours policy, most of them think that the purpose is to have a better work-life balance and to uphold occupational health and safety. Union members think that we can work through contractual arrangements to talk about the hours of work, overtime arrangements, and overtime compensation. And then that's followed by legislating for standard working hours and then legislating for maximum working hours. More members of trade unions have chosen the following options. First of all, no change to the existing regime. Second, individual sectors are setting their own voluntary guidelines. Third, mandating employers and employees should specify their hours of work, overtime arrangements, and overtime compensation in their employment contracts. Well, you would be interested to know our way forward. The committee is working at full steam and has got an internal working group to further explore the direction of the working hours topic. So it is an internal working group, a focus group. You know that it is complex, it is controversial on the labor market, on labor demand, on employer-employee relationship, business culture, business environment, competitiveness will all be affected to one extent or another. There will be far-reaching implications. Therefore, members of the SWHC would continue to work at full steam in an objective manner. They will be very conscious of the time, and they will forge a consensus. In the first quarter of next year, they will submit a report to the government, and we hope that we can find a right way for our policies on standard working hours or on working hours. Thank you. While the Secretary was speaking, we were joined by Mr. Nicholas Chen, Assistant Commissioner for Labour, as well as Mr. Desmond Howe, Principal Economist of the Financial Secretary's Office. Before we move on, I want to inform the administration that on the 10th of February at our meeting, we agreed to appoint a subcommittee to follow up on this topic. We have already queued up at the House Committee. We are on the second place, and we have to wait for other subcommittees to finish work before we can start. And we hope that once we can start our work, we hope the government will tie in with the work of the subcommittee. All right, the floor is now open to members for questions. Leung Kwok Hong, Chung Kok Bin, Lee Chek Yen, Ann Jang, Sin Chung Kai, Pun Xiu Ping. 6 of you would like to ask questions. Who else? I can't recall your proper name. I just know your nickname. Sorry, I know you are Dr. Leung Ka Lau. So 5 minutes each, covering both questions and answers. Leung Kwok Hong, Mr. Chairman. Now, C.Y. Leung has got this on his electoral platform. In the year 2010, in the year 2011, he initiated this idea, and then he had been exaggerating it, and he has always regarded it as a very important pledge for the labor sector when he ran for the CD's post. He has said that for Donald Tsang, the people of Hong Kong got the minimum wage, and for C.Y. Leung, we will get standard working hours. He's about to step down, and yet we haven't got anything from him. We are supposed to wait until next year. In fact, this is simple. Employers and employees have got different views. It means that the government should intervene. It is just like having 2 football teams. I don't think it's up to football team members to say whether they should be sent out. That's why we need a referee or umpire. I won't blame you, because I've always been very fair. I would hold the official who should be rightly accountable. I think C.Y. Leung cannot shirk his responsibility. He should be blamed. We are Chinese, and let me talk about how we should behave. We need to set our house in order, and then our family, our society will be on the right track. And we need to know about the matter before we can tell the right from the wrong. And then you will be honest, and then you can manage your domestic affairs, and then we can move out, reach out to the society, to nation, etc. Well, we can see from his domestic affairs what it is all about. We don't know what this is all about. We have had 4 or 5 cases already. So what can we expect of him? Now, we have got a clear pledge from him. It is beyond controversies. We have been promised standard working hours, and yet he's not going to give us standard working hours. There are things that we want to know, and yet he would remain silent. It's a matter of being crafty in his speech. So this society is sick. I'm not going to scold Mr. Jiang, because C.Y. Leung has this style of dragging his feet, or just telling the half-truths, or not telling us at all, or saying that saying is doing. Now, we have got this person. He knows what has been going on in his home, but he has never given us the truth. Every time it is like watching a suspense movie. What can we make out of it? Mr. Chairman, do you recall Mr. Ford, the US President? His wife was an alcoholic. He would like to protect his wife, and he was in great pain, and as a result he chose not to rerun for the office. So he would rather protect his wife than run for a second term. So this is life. You need to tell us the truth. Secretary, I want to know whether he has given you an order, whether he has given you a deadline. That is, I, C.Y. Leung, I've given a promise, I have to do it. And Leung Kwok Hong has said it many times. For a government, other than converting men into women, the government can do anything. If you have the will, you can do anything. Now we are already in the 3rd year of the term of the current government. Now you make us wait for the third quarter, and you are still unsure. So when it comes to governance, I want to know whether you have been given this tall order, that is, you have to deliver, otherwise you have to go. If you haven't been given this order, that means that there can be procrastination. Now look at what has happened to his own family, and that means we know whether he can manage himself, his family, his society, the nation. So if he can't deliver, he has to go home to sleep. Usually there's no need to give a reply to Mr. Lam Kwok Hong's speech. Next, Chung Kwok Pen. Mr. Chairman, thank you, but I want a response to my question. In paragraph 9 of the paper, we are told about that there was a survey concerning the working hours. I want to know whether the questionnaire itself can be disclosed. In particular, I want to know how you put your questions concerning overtime work. This is because I want to know how you define overtime work. Maybe a firm has specified working hours, but I know there are other companies which don't specify working hours. It's up to employees to interpret whether they have worked overtime. So I'm interested to find out more about the questionnaire. And then for the compensation for overtime, whether someone get overtime pay or time off in lieu. So whether you get a day off within the 7 days or whether you get a time off outside the 7-day cycle. This is because for certain sectors, they have peak seasons, they have slack seasons. When you are having overtime in the peak season, you don't get time off in lieu. You have to wait until the slack season. I want to know whether staff members understand this point. That is, you get compensated in the slack season, or would you insist that by compensation it means time off in lieu during the peak season as well? Secretary, the questionnaire. We have succinctly provided the findings of the survey in the paper. As to the full report, the consultant is finalizing the report. It takes time. Maybe the commissioner can supplement, that is, how overtime work is being defined. Or maybe Mr. Ho can also supplement. Yes, Mr. Ho. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Member. Well, for the methodology, it works like writing a journal. The interviewee has been asked to tell us about the hours worked in the previous 7 days. So first of all, he has to tell us about the contractual hours, say for example between 9 and 5 or what. So usually it's the working hours already agreed between the employer and the employee, and then we will ask whether they have been working outside the agreed working hours. So it's up to the interviewee to tell us. So any activities outside the agreed working hours and regarded as related to work in the eyes of the employee, then that will be regarded as overtime work. That's how we've been collecting the information.
As regards compensate, when the overtime work is compensated, it has no relevance. The respondent will be asked whether there was any overtime pay or time off in lieu. As regards when time off in lieu was given, it was irrelevant. It was not one of the considerations for deciding whether there was compensation or not. Any follow-up, Mr. Zhong? No? Then Mr. Lee Chek-yen. Thank you. If we look at the survey, we see that 60% of the contracts had not got anything on compensated overtime work. So 60% of the workforce in Hong Kong do not get any compensation for overtime work. For the remaining 40, there may be stipulation, but we don't know whether they are compensated. So 60% of our workers do not get compensation for overtime work. That's quite serious. And 20% of the employees work overtime without any compensation for up to 5 hours. So there are 3 million working hours. So all the workers in Hong Kong have got 3 million working hours worked without any compensation. 60% of them had no stipulation of compensation for overtime work, and about 20% of them had to work for 5 hours of OT on average per week. So the government like to talk about public opinion. According to the survey, 67.5% supported legislation on standard working hours, and 20% maximum working hours. So most people agree to all 5. Legislation alone, there was 60 to 70% who supported legislation. So using the government's standard, 70% when it comes to electoral reforms, if there were 50% of respondents supporting the reforms, so should we pass it? Why don't you act according to public opinion here? 70% of the respondents supported legislation. In conclusion of the paper, I fail to see how this conclusion is arrived at. Another working group is to be set up. If you got a committee with 2 working groups set up and you want another committee set up, I fail to understand why you don't ask the Commission to discuss the issues. Instead, you have another working group. So I think you are moving round and round in circles. I don't know whether the Secretary's hobby is social dance. You like to move around in circles in the dancing floor until it's time for CY Leung's term to end and yours to end as well. And then you may say afterwards that we have to wait until next year, and we don't know whether it will really happen next year. Even if it does, we know that it can't be implemented. If you decide to legislate next year, you can't do it within a year. This term, we have less than half a year to go before we end. So you have to wait for another LegCo to be elected, and the C has only got 1.5 years to finish his term, unless you have insider information that he is going to serve another term. But anyway, I don't know whether you are going to conclude next year that you would legislate on standard working hours. So perhaps you should not continue to deceive Hong Kong people. You should put the whole proposal in hibernation, because you have no sincerity at all. I don't know what the Secretary is going to say in response. He would say that he is pragmatic. Well, it is the committee's decision to set up a task force. It's not dictated by us. You have to understand that we must respect this high-level commission with 24 members with due participation from the labor sector as well. And the view of the chairman, Dr. CH Leung, is not really another working group. It's just a smaller working group or task force. So you are moving around in circles with CH Leung. No, Dr. Leung is saying that there are already 2 working groups, one on consultation and one on survey. So together with an academic, they can then discuss. So we also have to set up subcommittee under this panel. So we will continue to move around in circles. Dr. An Chang, thank you. Regarding a minimum wage and standard working hours, they were first raised by legislators many years ago. We've already got the SMW in Hong Kong, statutory minimum wage. And the SMW has been revised a number of times, is now close to $33, very close to the first proposed level. So why you want to establish another task force? I think is a waste of time. So we've got the findings from the survey. 82.7 or 88.6% of the employees have got have stipulated hours of work per week. So close to 90% of the employers have this concept of agreed working hours with employees. And the question is, if employees have worked beyond that stipulated hours, how should compensation be like? So shouldn't we clarify this? Para 13 of the paper has got findings of a survey. So why don't you require employment contracts to stipulate the hours of work and also the mode of compensation for overtime work? 93.7% of the employees will want you to do this. So can you just enact some bylaws or regulations under the employment ordinance? Then you can move quicker. Now you may say that I'm from the employer side. I used to be in business, but now because I am a legislator, I like to speak both for employers and employees here. Many of us were in the business sector many years ago. Even factory owners was stipulate the standard hours of work and also how overtime work should be calculated and compensated. It's so clear. So how come we still talk about this today? Chairman, why don't we agree unanimously and ask the administration not to come back next year? Where are we now? We're only in March. Perhaps the administration should come back next month to stipulate in employment contracts that overtime worked beyond the stipulated hours of work should be compensated. Can that be done? Employers are very kind now, and you should do it because there is a labor shortage. Because if you do it a few years afterwards, we don't know what the economy will be. Employers may complain, but now because our business is good, I don't think employers will mind. Or I can reflect your views to the committee, which is going to meet tomorrow morning. We'll reflect your views to the committee at once. We do respect your view and your analysis. We will consider whether your proposal is feasible. Different options will be explored, so your proposal will be among the options we're going to consider. Thank you. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, to be followed by Mr. Pan Xiaoping, the Secretary. You're an expert in this. You like to talk about implementation in phases, but you are not yet up to that stage now. You are still stalling. Mr. Lee Chek-yen said that you are dancing and moving around in circles. I think you are actually stalling. There are different ways to do it. You can do it partially or to cover all trade, so on and so forth, but we all hope that there can be some form of legislation. It is useless to rely on employers to act on a voluntary basis. They can always do it. So shouldn't you give us a timetable for legislation? Because with only 7 or 18 months or so left in this term of LegCo, if you stall for another 2 or 3 months, this legislative session will be over, or even the whole term will expire. And then after the new LegCo is formed, it will be the government's turn to be re-elected. And I don't know whether we have to wait for another 3-5 years before there can be legislation. I think there is strong consensus in this council. I believe you should have enough support for enacting legislation in this term. Are you stalling, Secretary? Well, we really are not stalling. You look at that 24-member strong committee. It has done something very substantial. It has done a lot of work covering public consultation, initiating a public discussion, collecting information, data analysis. You must give time and room for the committee members to do their work properly. Have you ever consulted the public on your legislative proposals? Is there a timetable for enacting legislation? It is for the committee to advise the government on the way forward. I believe there is the consensus that we must face up to this problem of long working hours. The problem is what are the best ways and means to tackle this problem. You must allow the committee the room to map out a way forward. Well, there can be different forms of public consultation. You spent 2 years to consult the public on the least sensitive issues. Shouldn't you consult the employees on the most sensitive issues? You haven't been direct enough in the past 2 years. You should take out the most critical issues, the most sensitive issues to consult the public. At the end of the day, your consideration is whether you can get the support of LegCo. For the really very draconian measures, you may not be able to get the support of this council, but for really balanced measures, I think you can be sure of our support. You have spent the past 2 years on the least sensitive issues of this subject. I think you should devote your time on the more critical issues. I think, Mr. Singh, you should ask the administration whether there is any intention to legislate. Of course, I have to ask this, but what is the legislative direction? Well, if they don't even have the intention to enact legislation, what legislative direction can they have? Mr. Zin said that we have not touched on the most sensitive issues. In fact, through their very pragmatic work in the past 2 years, we have a whole lot of data. Now, we always say that we want to be evidence-based. We have so much scientific evidence. We surveyed households, we had a scientific analysis, so such data will form an excellent basis for the administration to choose the right way forward that suits Hong Kong most.
Both the committee and ourselves are determined to study the topic, that is whether we should regulate working hours and how. All right, Mr. Poon and then Dr. Leung. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having heard the Secretary, it is very difficult to say that the committee has been in existence for 2 years, and then a consultant has been engaged, and then for the committee it will set up another focus group, and it will have to carry on its work for another year. And again, we have been told that the consultant is finalizing the report. I want to know when the consultant will submit the report to the committee, and will the final report be made public as well. Now, you need another year to do a lot of work again. Of course, you have said that a lot has to be covered. You would like to find time to finish the task. How come that it has to take 1 year? Is it because you have a lack of manpower? Tell us why you need that much time. Can you not compress it, shorten the time needed, so that the committee can deliver its findings and recommendations earlier? Secretary, there are 23 members on the committee. Some members even passed away, and there was a change of membership with the Labour Advisory Board. It is really a problem to see that it has been dragged on for so long. So can you not tell and ask the committee to expedite their work? If they need more manpower, maybe the administration should find ways to help them to speed up. Can you find ways to speed up the work so that they won't be marking time? Currently, the consultants are finalizing the final report. I think by the second quarter it will be ready. So you give them a deadline. Yes, of course. Otherwise, they can't get the consultancy fee, so they won't be motivated to mark time. Now, for the data, conclusions, arguments, etc., all of them will be very useful. As to whether the report will be published is up to the committee to decide, because the committee hasn't read the report. As to whether we can tighten up the timetable, well, it is already a very tight timetable. We are approaching the end of the first quarter. Come April, and that's the beginning of the second quarter. So the committee is expected to submit a report to the government next year. So there isn't much time in between. There will be options available, and then the economists must work on the economic implications of the options. So there's still a lot of work to be covered, and it can't be done overnight, because we're talking about economic analysis, and we have to go through the computer modeling. So even though we are talking about a few months' time, it isn't a long time. We don't need to worry. Certainly, in the first quarter of next year, the committee will report to the government. That's the timetable. They can't be later than that. Of course, your concerns will be related to the committee, to ask them to see if they can further compress the timetable. 1 year's time. Is it a request from the committee, or is it a suggestion from the government? In accordance with the progress, Dr. Leung talked to the committee, and in fact tomorrow they're holding a meeting to talk about the way forward. So we must give them time and space to maneuver. If we are hearing them, I'm afraid more haste will make less speed. If they can come back with an option which is pragmatic and practicable, then we should give them time. So we should be more tolerant. Thank you. Dr. Leung Ka-Lau. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, for working hours, standard working hours, I have my position. But that aside, it won't affect my analysis of your report, the methodology of your survey, as well as your approach in an objective manner. When I read your papers and when I listened to the Secretary's briefing, well, I think somehow you have sort of told us what the government's position is like. Usually you will set out the government's position first. You try to make it scientific. I want to point out that in paragraph 13 as well as paragraph 15, you have asked the respondent to say whether they agree, disagree, or they have no comment to the 5 options available. And so when you analyze the information, you can only tell how many would agree, how many would disagree. Say, for example, 94% would like to stipulate the hours of work. But then, on such a basis, you cannot then say whether most people would like to stipulate the hours of work. I'm afraid such a methodology is wrong. This is because for the 5 options offered, for the respondents, they don't regard the 5 options as exclusive of each other. For the option gathering the largest number of agreement, it may not be the most preferred option. If you want to establish that, you have to offer the 5 options in one single question and then ask the respondent to note that it is mutually exclusive, and then you can find out which option has the greatest support. So I have to tell you that the way you conducted the survey, the way you presented the paper, it doesn't mean that the majority of the employees are in support of stipulating the hours of work, overtime arrangements, and overtime compensation in employment contracts. So we need to work on the data. We need to be scientific. So you have been wrong in your methodology. Dr. N. Zhang has her point, but then it is not based on the data, and it is not the conclusion. Now, stipulating hours of work, overtime arrangements, and overtime compensation in employment contracts. Can we also say that the standard working hours are 44, no compensation for overtime, and no limit on the overtime worked? I want to know whether you have implied such an arrangement in your survey. If you have stated clearly, employees would not have agreed. Because the way you put it would lead the employees to think that hours of work will be stipulated, and overtime worked will be compensated, and there will be a cap on the time or on the hours of overtime worked. However, you may follow the example of the hospital authority doctors. That is, you have 44 hours of work being stipulated, but no overtime compensation and no maximum working hours. You won't have time left for the secretary to give an answer. No need. I think you have already forged a consensus. Over 70% of the labor union members think that it is suitable for Hong Kong. 14% think no. And then only 42% think that it is not suitable for Hong Kong. That's the case of the trade associations. Well, in fact, from the 2 paragraphs involved, employers and employees already think that standard working hours are right for Hong Kong. Ms. Chen Yun-hen, I think life will be difficult for the secretary. No, I don't think so. I agree very much with what Dr. Leung has said. Just now, I thought you saw me rushing here and there to get the paper. I thought it was the report from the consultant, but in fact, it's just the attendance list. I was trying to read paragraphs 13 and 15. I rushed back from a district council meeting. I don't know what they want to tell us. But then the direction is clear. For paragraph 15, and this about the survey of employers. 56.1% agree to set standard working hours. 42.6% would like to set maximum working hours. That's the employer's stance. Yes, you have got the first three options. Let's not talk about the first three options, but whether we need to do it or not, I think the direction is very clear. I think had it been for the political reform, then it is a piece of good news. That means we should take what's already on offer. I think the government should think about it now. Of course, setting standard working hours imply having overtime compensation and overtime arrangements. For maximum working hours, that would be a step further. So what's the point of having further meetings? What else do you need? I think the committee is very representative. Your report is quite big, but still I can identify certain consensus. Now, even employers, despite years of controversies, have finally agreed to give it to us. So 80% of the employers agree to give us working hours, standard working hours. Now, it seems that you want us to take whatever we want from the report. I won't take you to task like what Dr. Leung has said. From paragraphs 13 and 15, we see what the government would like to do. I think the government wants to create an impression that the government can't take this forward. In a moment, I'll give him time to reply. For this term of the electrical, we have only 1 year left. For the CE, just about 2 years' time. Can you give us a timetable and a roadmap? We have been arguing, we have been debating on it for 20 years. Now we're in the final stage. Can you not tell us the following? For the CE's electoral pledge, when will he honor his pledge? So please give us an answer. You say you will come back to see us in a year's time. Secretary, for the committee, the rest of the work will mean that they will work at full steam. And by the first quarter next year, they must give a report to the government. That is the future of working hours. When we receive the report, we will deal with it immediately. The current term government will last until June 2017. For the electrical, come same time next year, you will start your electoral arrangements. Now, if in March we get a report and there is a consensus, then the rest of it would just be implementation and how. Now, Secretary, are you telling us that you want to tell us that we have to wait until the eve of the CE election? That means everything will be decided in 2017, including retirement protection. So why can't you make it earlier?
Because in the first quarter of next year, that is 2016, we will receive the report and we will have to deal with it at once. We have internal procedures to follow. Yes, I respect your procedures, but you have to wait until so late. Can the report be handed in the middle of this year? Well, as I explained, the commission or the committee under the leadership of Dr. Leung has made very clear that in the first quarter of next year, well, the basic law says that we have an executive-led government under the monitoring of LegCo. I don't believe that you are so open-minded as to allow the Commission to decide when to give the report. I don't believe that will be the case. Ask Mr. C.H. Leung to hand in the report in the middle of this year. That is not feasible. Please allow the Secretary to finish first, because we are awaiting a complete report from both consultants. They are finalizing the reports. And then after we've got the report, we have to consider the way forward. Because interpretations may be different. As you said, we all interpret the findings to our own liking. So it is important to foster a social consensus. We need time. If we press the committee to give us a report by mid-June, then it will be neither here nor there. It will be more haste, more waste. So we have to be fair to the committee. I think it is worthwhile to give the committee more time. Madam Chair, I think we should press the government in the working group. Yes, I agree. Next time we should invite chairman of the committee, Dr. Leung, to meet us. Yes, at the subcommittee. All right. You should fight to become the chairman of that subcommittee. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we have been chasing for that report for a long time. At long last, we have some statistics here. It is long overdue. I don't know when employees can really enjoy standard working hours. Of course, the greatest resistance or the first obstacle is employers, because it would mean money from employers. But if an employer doesn't require his employees to work uncompensated overtime work, there is no financial implications on him. So I think the employers that complained the loudest will be those who have been exploiting their employees. And as for employees, when we promote the awareness of working hours, many of them have mixed the concept of standing working hours and maximum working hours. They may think that standard working hours means that they cannot work beyond that number of hours. In fact, that is the concept of maximum working hours. In fact, the concept of standard working hours is to fight for compensated overtime work of employees at a rate of 1.5. I hope that employees can understand this. Surprisingly, the report mentioned that some employees prefer maximum working hours to standard working hours. That's a bit surprising. I hope the department concerned can find out what's the rationale behind this. Is it because people think that the wages specified in the agreement contract might be deducted as a result? In fact, if we have standard working hours, employees will see their income or wages increased as a result. We know that the ultimate objective of having standard working hours is to achieve work-life balance, better work-life balance for employees. And in the interim, our concern is to ensure that employees do not have to work overtime, work uncompensated. This is to ensure that their sweat and labor will be compensated. Ms. Anna Wu said something which impressed me recently. She said that it was difficult to forge a consensus between the employers and employees, and therefore the government should have its own position. If every time we can only have a consensus after a lot of controversies, then the government is not taking any leadership role. So you have the statistics here. Why don't you analyze these figures and take forward your legislative work without waiting until 2016? If the Policy Bureau, i.e. the Labor and Welfare Bureau, is willing to take on this task, we can reduce the fatalities within the committee where employers and employees are fighting and arguing. Why doesn't the administration take up this responsibility and relieve the the committee of this very onerous task? So, is the Bureau willing to take on this role? Secretary, is the Bureau willing to take on this role of taking forward with legislative work? We are certainly willing to implement recommendations by the committee. Please be patient. I think it is worthwhile to wait for the report from the committee. Mr. Kwok, I don't think you are competent enough to force the Secretary to answer your question. Dr. N. Zhang, we know that this is a very complicated matter. We talked about how standard working hours should be determined. We've been arguing over this for more than a decade. Even if we do so for another 1 or 2 decades, still we won't be able to have a consensus. So, Secretary, a survey was done, and many people think that 93.7% believed that there should be stipulation of hours of work, overtime arrangements, and overtime compensation in employment contracts. So we should do this first as regards how the calculation is done and how overtime should be compensated. We should let employers and employees to settle it. We don't need to go into very complicated issues, because SWH is indeed a very complicated matter. You know, I have young employees who would like to stay after work to wait for their girlfriends or family members. So why don't you decide to stipulate the hours of work and overtime arrangements and overtime compensation and employment contracts first? Dr. Leung Ka-Lau. Paragraph 30. I think there is already a consensus. 48 against 42% felt that it was not suitable. SWH was not suitable. I will ask Mr. Ho, the Secretary of the committee, to respond. But there are several views contained in paragraph 30. For paragraphs 8 through 16, we have got the responses from territory-wide survey, and in paragraph 30, we've got responses from labor unions and trade associations. These were not findings from randomly selected sample of respondents. Mr. Leung, yes, I do get Mr. Leung's or Dr. Leung's views. The design of the questionnaire is such that we were given independent views from the consultants. The design of the questionnaire and the wording used was thoroughly discussed in the committee, and ultimately the Commission agreed on the format and design of the questionnaire. Para 13, footnote 11, has 100% reflected the various options available to the respondents. So we surveyed the respondents and asked them to pick the option they preferred. Chairman, my question was not answered. Stipulation of hours of work, overtime arrangements, and overtime compensation in employment contracts. Now, if the employment contract said that there would not be any limit on the amount of overtime work and there would be no compensation, will it be against the option here? So I'd like to know whether the respondents were given an interpretation or understanding of this option. The questionnaire is 20 pages long, so one interview took almost half an hour. So there was no assumption. We just read out the questions and the options, and we allowed the respondent to choose the option they like. But this is very interesting. You ask a question which you don't understand, and the respondent didn't know what he was answering. All right. Now, if the stipulation is there is no limit to the hours of work, is it against the employment contract, or can the employment contract stipulate this? I don't think you know what you are asking, nor would the respondent know what he is answering. I don't think you can get any answer even if you press on. So the meeting ends here. We don't have any AOB. We thank the Secretary, Ms. Tam, Mr. Tong, and his officials for attending this meeting. Thank you.